Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. We love to go deep on this show. And today we're going to be looking at the Passion of Christ.
All right.
And we're going to be doing that through the lens of this text called Texto Pagado.
Sounds good.
So are you ready to kind of unpack all the emotional weight and the spiritual and theological significance of this really pivotal event?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, cool. So I think what really strikes me as we jump into this is how Texto Pagado starts with the very human story of the Passion. We see betrayal with Judas, the mockery that Jesus faces during the trial, just the sheer injustice of it all.
Right.
And I think what's so powerful about that is that those events aren't just from, some distant past.
Yeah.
They tap into these universal human experiences that I think we still grapple with today.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. We can all relate to those feelings of betrayal or, being misunderstood or unfairly judged.
Right. Have you ever felt like that?
Yeah. I think everyone has in some way or another.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what makes the Passion narrative so powerful, is that it gives us a language to understand our own pain and struggles.
Absolutely.
It's like we see ourselves reflected in these stories.
Yeah, and it helps us to make sense of those experiences in a way that feels really meaningful.
So from those kind of universal human experiences, Texto Pagado then transitions into the Last Supper.
Oh, okay.
And I think things get even more intense here. What is it about this meal that makes it so much more than just dinner?
Well, this is where the bread and wine, come in as the representations of Jesus's body and blood. And it really sort of establishes a new covenant, right, between God and humanity.
Right.
And that kind of institution of the Eucharist is like a profound mystery at the heart of, Christian faith.
Help me understand that. Why is this such a pivotal moment?
Well, for centuries, people have been debating, what does it actually mean? Is it truly Christ's body and blood, or is it symbolic?
Right.
And what does it mean for us to participate in that ritual? I think those are some pretty big questions.
Yeah, huge questions.
That, people are still wrestling with today.
And then there's this added layer of tension, right? Because we know that Jesus knows that Judas is going to betray him, and he reveals that to his disciples.
Right, at the table.
Right there at the table. Yeah. Can you imagine the shock and the confusion that they must have felt in that moment?
Yeah, it's just like this total mind twist because Judas's betrayal, even though it's so painful, it's part of fulfilling the divine prophecy. Right. So it raises these questions about, free will versus destiny.
It's so interesting, too, because even knowing that he's about to be betrayed, Jesus takes the time to wash his disciples' feet.
Right.
Talk about a powerful symbol of humility.
Yeah. It just completely flips the script on what we think of as traditional leadership.
Right.
Instead of power and dominance, we see service and compassion. And I think that's really what Jesus is showing us here, is that true leadership is about prioritizing the needs of others. Yeah. And leading through humility.
It's a good lesson for all of us, I think.
For sure.
So from the Last Supper, we move to the Garden of Gethsemane.
Okay.
And Texto Pagado describes this as a peaceful olive grove, turned into this space of intense spiritual struggle.
Yeah.
What's happening here?
Well, this is where Jesus is really grappling with the weight of what's to come.
Right.
And his prayer that, let this cup pass from me, but not as I will, but as you will. It shows a very human side of Christ.
Yeah.
He's recoiling from the suffering, but he's ultimately choosing to submit to God's plan.
The text also mentions that he was sweating blood, which is a condition called hematidrosis.
Yeah.
Is that like a real thing?
It is, yeah. It can occur under extreme stress.
Wow.
But some people, some theological interpretations, see it as a physical manifestation of, Christ's profound spiritual anguish, like a sign of, bearing the sins of the world.
That's heavy.
It is, yeah.
To think about the agony that he must have been experiencing, and then you contrast that with the disciples who can't even stay awake to pray with him. It's just this stark contrast.
It highlights our human struggle to stay present and engaged, when we're faced with something so overwhelming.
Right, and we see this even today, right? How people so often want to avoid or downplay difficult situations instead of confronting them head on.
Totally.
And then the calm of the garden is totally shattered with the arrival of Judas and the soldiers.
Right.
And it's so fascinating to me that Judas uses a kiss as a sign of betrayal.
Yeah, the kiss of betrayal is such a poignant detail, right? Because it's like this contrast between the intimacy of the gesture, but also this act of treachery.
Yeah.
It's almost Shakespearean.
Yeah, totally. And then you have Peter, ever the impulsive one. He tries to defend Jesus with the sword.
Oh, yeah, good old Peter.
Yeah. How does that incident speak to Jesus' teachings?
Well, in a moment of incredible mercy, Jesus heals the servant that Peter injured.
Right.
And he emphasizes that violence isn't the answer, so it underscores his commitment to nonviolence and accepting his fate.
It's powerful, right? Because it's this reminder that his mission wasn't about earthly power or fighting back.
Exactly.
It was about something so much bigger.
Yeah, his willingness to endure suffering rather than escape it. That's really central to understanding the Passion.
Right.
It points to a deeper transformative purpose.
So Jesus is taken from the garden. He's brought to the high priest's house. The trials begin.
Right.
What do these trials reveal about the political and religious dynamics of the time?
Well, it highlights this tension that's going on between the Jewish religious authorities and the Roman government.
Okay.
And it exposes our human tendency to kind of manipulate systems for personal gain, right?
Yeah.
Like we see with the false witnesses and the lack of evidence presented against Jesus.
And then you have Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, kind of stuck in the middle.
Yeah.
He seems to see that Jesus is innocent, but he ultimately caves to the pressure of the crowd.
Right.
I mean, what does his decision tell us about the tension between power and justice and public opinion?
Well, it's a classic dilemma, He's torn between what his conscience is telling him and the demands of his position.
Right.
So it asks us to consider, how do we act when we're faced with the choice between what's right and what's expedient, especially when you have that public pressure.
That's a tough one.
It is.
So to appease the crowd, Pilate orders Jesus to be flogged. And how brutal was Roman scourging?
Oh, man. Roman scourging was horrific.
Right.
They would whip the victim repeatedly with this thing called a flagrum, which is a whip with multiple leather thongs embedded with pieces of bone or metal.
Oh, my God.
So you can imagine the victim would be left permanently scarred and just completely disfigured.
It's chilling to think about what Jesus endured, especially since he went through it without protest.
I know, his silence is powerful.
Yeah.
Like he knows what's coming and he accepts it.
So weakened and bloodied from the scourging. Jesus is then forced to carry his own cross to Golgotha, the place of execution.
Right.
What's the significance of Simon of Cyrene being forced to help carry the cross?
Well, I think it highlights the idea of shared suffering. We all carry burdens in life, and sometimes we need others to help us bear that weight.
Right.
So Simon's act of compassion, even though he's coerced, it reminds us that we're not meant to suffer alone.
I love that. And then there's this encounter that Jesus has with the weeping women while he's walking this path.
Yeah.
Why does he tell them to weep not for him, but for themselves and their children?
It seems like he's pointing to this bigger picture, this deeper understanding of what's unfolding.
Right.
He's saying that his suffering isn't just about him, it's about the fate of humanity, about the consequences of sin and the need for redemption.
And finally they arrive at Golgotha, and Jesus is nailed to the cross. And Texto Pagano doesn't shy away from the brutal reality of crucifixion.
Yeah, crucifixion was a horrific way to die. Every breath would have been excruciating.
But the text points out that the physical pain is only part of the story.
Right.
What's truly profound is that spiritual dimension of Jesus' suffering, that sense of separation from God, the weight of the world's sin upon him.
Yeah.
That's where the true agony lies.
Exactly. A darkness that we can barely comprehend. It is a darkness that we can barely comprehend. But amidst that darkness, we also see this incredible light shining through.
So even in the midst of all that suffering and pain, there's still this message of hope.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes the Passion so powerful. It's not just a story of suffering and death. It's a story of transformation.
Right. Texto Pagano really emphasizes this idea that the Passion ultimately reveals the depth of God's love and the transformative power of sacrifice.
Yeah, and it challenges us to confront our own shortcomings. Are we capable of that kind of love and forgiveness that Christ demonstrated? Are we willing to embrace sacrifice for the sake of others?
It's like the Passion is holding up this mirror to each of us and asking, how are you going to live in response to this?
Exactly. It's a call to action. The text reminds us that the cross, once a symbol of shame and defeat, has become a beacon of hope and victory.
That's a powerful image. But for some people, the Passion can feel overwhelming, almost too big to grasp. How can we connect with it on a personal level?
Well, I think the text suggests starting with reflection. Consider the elements of the Passion story that resonate with you. Where do you see echoes of betrayal in your own life, or moments of sacrifice, or times when you struggle to stay present, like the disciples in Gethsemane?
So thinking about those experiences, how can we connect them to those larger themes of the Passion? Those themes of love, forgiveness, suffering, redemption?
I think it's like we're invited to find ourselves within the story. The Passion isn't just about Jesus, it's about us. It's about the human condition and our potential for both darkness and light.
So if we can relate to the characters and the events of the Passion on this personal level, what does that mean for how we live our lives?
Well, I think that's where the real challenge lies. The Passion isn't just about feeling emotional, it's about being transformed. It's about taking those insights and allowing them to shape how we treat others, how we approach our own suffering, and how we understand love and forgiveness.
So it's about more than just believing that the story happened. It's about letting the story change us.
Exactly. Texto Pagado challenges us to ask ourselves, how can we embody those values that Christ demonstrated? Humility, compassion, selflessness. How can we be instruments of love and forgiveness in a world that often feels so broken and divided?
Those are big questions, but they feel really important. Like they're getting to the heart of what it means to be human.
That's the power of the Passion narrative, It compels us to grapple with these essential questions and to seek deeper meaning and purpose in our lives.
It's like it's offering a roadmap, not just for understanding our faith, but for understanding ourselves.
Exactly. And even if you don't approach this story from a faith perspective, the themes that it explores, love, sacrifice, the struggle for justice, those are universal and timeless.
As we're talking about this, I'm realizing that the Passion is more than just a single event. It's an ongoing story.
That's a great observation. The struggle for love and justice, the fight against darkness and despair, those are things that we face every day, both individually and collectively.
So the question isn't just what happened 2,000 years ago. It's how is the Passion unfolding in our world right now? And what role do we play in that story?
Those are profound questions to ponder. And as we continue our deep dive, I encourage you to keep those questions in mind. Because the Passion isn't just a story from the past, it's a story that we're all living, writing, and rewriting every single day. Now let's return to the narrative. Jesus is on the cross enduring unimaginable physical and spiritual pain, and Texto Pagado really emphasizes the spiritual dimension of his suffering.
Right, goes beyond just the physical torture. Imagine that feeling of separation from God, the weight of humanity's sins upon him. That's where the true agony lies.
Yeah, a darkness that we can barely comprehend. And it's in these final moments that he utters those words that have echoed through centuries. Forgiveness for his executioners, a promise of paradise to the repentant thief.
What's the significance of those words?
Well, they reveal the depths of his compassion and love, even in the face of unimaginable suffering. They offer this glimpse into his divine nature and purpose. The forgiveness that he extends isn't just a personal act, it's a cosmic one, a demonstration of God's boundless mercy.
And then there's that cry of utter desolation. My God, why have you forsaken me? It's just heart-wrenching to imagine that feeling of abandonment even from God.
It captures the depths of human despair, right? The feeling of being utterly alone in the face of suffering. Some theologians interpret it as the culmination of Jesus taking on the sins of the world, experiencing the full weight of human separation from God.
But then amidst that despair, he declares, "It is finished." What a powerful declaration of victory. What does that signify?
It marks the completion of his mission. This act of ultimate love and sacrifice is fulfilled. His death is not a defeat, it's a triumph. It opens the way for reconciliation between God and humanity.
And at that moment, Texto Pagado describes these cosmic events. The earth trembles, the sky goes dark, the temple veil is torn in two. What's the meaning behind these really dramatic occurrences?
Well, they symbolize a major spiritual shift. The tearing of the temple veil, which separated the Holy of Holies from the rest of the temple. It signifies that access to God is now open to all. It's a powerful visual representation of that barrier between humanity and the divine being broken down.
Wow, these events are just so powerful and multi-layered in their meaning. It's a lot to process. I'm curious to explore more about how we can apply the message of the Passion to our lives today.
Absolutely. Let's delve into that further in the next part of our deep dive.
We're back, and man, this deep dive into the Passion, it's been really moving.
Yeah, heavy stuff.
It really is. The events, the symbolism, the emotional and spiritual weight. It's a lot to take in.
It is.
But what strikes me is how the Passion isn't just about suffering and death. Texto Pagado really emphasizes these themes of love and forgiveness and ultimately hope, woven throughout this narrative.
Right. It's not a tragedy. It's a story of transformation.
Yeah.
It's about the triumph of love over hate, of hope over despair.
But I think the question that lingers for many is, we look around the world and we see so much suffering and injustice and division. How do we hold on to that hope?
It is the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
How to hold on to that hope.
Yeah.
I think the challenge is to remember that the Passion isn't just a story from the past. It's still being written and we're all part of it.
So how do we live out the message of the passion in our everyday lives?
Well, Texto Pagado offers some powerful guidance there.
Okay.
It reminds us that Christ's example, calls us to love unconditionally, to forgive freely, and to serve selflessly.
Those are big concepts.
They are big concepts.
What does that actually look like, in our day-to-day interactions?
It can be as simple as choosing kindness over anger, empathy over judgment. It could be reaching out to someone who's hurting, offering a listening ear or a helping hand, speaking up against injustice when you see it, even when it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's easy to feel like our individual acts of kindness or efforts to make a difference are just drops in the ocean.
Yeah.
How do we overcome that sense of insignificance?
Remember Simon of Cyrene helping Jesus carry the cross.
Right.
Even a small act of support can make a difference. It's about sharing the burden, being part of something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah, it's that reminder that we're not alone in this.
Right.
When we choose love and forgiveness and service, we're participating in something much larger than ourselves.
Absolutely. And by doing so, we're not just making a difference in the lives of others, we're transforming ourselves.
Right.
We become part of that redemptive story, that ongoing struggle for a better world.
So the Passion offers us like an act of hope, a call to participate in this unfolding story of love and grace.
Yes, and the invitation's open to everyone.
Yeah.
Whether you approach this story from a faith perspective or not, the themes of love and sacrifice and the pursuit of justice, they're universal and timeless.
As we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one takeaway that you hope our listeners will carry with them?
I hope they'll remember that the Passion of Christ, it's not just a story to be read or heard, it's an invitation to be lived.
An invitation to embrace love and practice forgiveness and step into the world with compassion and courage.
And to remember that even in the face of suffering and darkness, hope remains.
Yeah.
The story isn't over and we all have a part to play.
Well, thank you for guiding us through this incredible journey.
It's been my pleasure.
I think I'll be reflecting on these insights for a long time to come.
I think we all will. And to our listeners, as you go about your week, look for those moments where you can embody the spirit of the Passion. Choose love, extend grace, be a beacon of hope in the world.
Beautiful. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking truth and meaning in the stories that shape our lives.